This interview is part of the James J. Blanchard Living Library of Michigan Political History. We're here today with Senator Bob VanderLaan, who was a seminal figure in 20th century Michigan politics. Bob VanderLaan, great pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, happy to be here.
Let me start out with this question. You were born in Paris Township, Kent County. I don't even think that exists anymore, does it?
No, it doesn't. It's now the city of Kentwood, but it's...
When did it become Kentwood?
1961.
Okay, so you were not only born in Paris Township, you eventually became, I think, a trustee and the clerk, maybe, and also the supervisor.
I did. I started out as library commissioner, and then in 1954 I became a trustee. In 1959 I became clerk, and in 1960 supervisor.
Wow. Steady progress upward.
Steady progress.
And you were very young. You were in your 20s then, right?
I was. I left there when I was 32, so I was in the 20s for most of the time.
You were a young senator. And you, I'm going to go back a little bit here. You were born in Paris Township. Your parents, were they longtime residents of that area?
My father moved to Paris Township in about 1900.
Okay.
And he was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan. My mother was born in Chicago and came to Michigan, to Holland, Michigan, when she was a teenager. And then they married and lived in Paris Township.
Did she have a Dutch background too?
She did. She was from Friesland. She was a Dijkstra and came from Friesland.
Well, all these Dutch, they came either maybe to Chicago in your mother's family's case, but mainly to Holland and West Michigan, what, in the 1840s?
The early Dutch came in 1840, 1845, 1848. There was a wave of Dutch people. That's about the time the Irish had their potato famine, and right. A lot of Irish came too, and that same economic problem affected most of Europe, and that's why they came over, the early Dutch. The later Dutch in the late 1800s came over primarily for religious reasons. Some settled in Iowa, some in Chicago, and some in Grand Rapids.
Which generation were you from the original Dutch settlers? Third or fourth generation?
My great-grandparents lived in the Netherlands and were there and raised a family. My great-grandmother did come to America. My grandparents came to America as young people, and my parents were born in America, and I was born here, of course.
So you're only the second generation born in this. Did they start out as farmers? Were they farmers?
No, they started out in Grand Rapids primarily as furniture factory workers.
Okay.
They came over as farmers, but they got jobs in the furniture industry. And then they had roots, of course, in agriculture in the Netherlands, and as soon as they could gather enough money to buy a farm or rent one, then they moved out of the city of Grand Rapids into the suburban areas or township areas.
Was that the Paris Township move back around the turn of the century?
That was Paris Township.
They finally got enough money to start a farm.
Yes, they did.
And so, were you raised on a farm?
I was raised on a farm.
Wow.
In Paris Township.
No kidding.
Yep.
So you had the early morning chores and the whole 9 yards?
Sure did. My father was a builder. He started out building barns, and later he built homes. He got his start really in World War II. He was in the League Island Navy Yard in Pennsylvania as a construction worker on converting ships over to warships, and then he kept that trade back in Michigan.
Right. Well, now, did you go to the public school system or the private school system over there?
I went to the public school system for the first 8 years, to Smith School, as it was called. It was a quarter mile from our house, and I had the same teacher for 8 years. Following that, I went to Grand Rapids Christian High School, which was in the city. It was a large high school, still there today.
Right.
And following that, I went to Calvin College and University of Michigan.
So Smith School was kind of like the old-fashioned little red schoolhouse?
One-room country school, and it was red. We had the same teacher, and we had about 30 to 40 students depending on the particular year.
What was the population roughly when you were growing up of Paris Township, would you say?
I think it was 2,000. 2,000 people. It was,
and today, what is the city of Kentland?
maybe 30,000.
Wow. Okay, so you got through Grand Rapids Christian, and then you went to Calvin?
Then I went to Calvin College.
Okay. Yep. And what did you major in?
I majored in political science and history.
So you were always interested in political science and history, right?
I was. Our teacher in the 8th grade had a husband who was very much interested in politics. And he used to bring her to school in the morning, and then he would sit and talk politics with us. And we got interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read somewhere that you were a delegate to every state convention beginning in the year Eisenhower was nominated in 1952, right up until the time you left the legislature 30 years later.
I think that's true.
So you were really into it at an early age. So when you got out of Calvin, then what? Did you start teaching right away? Or?
Yes, I started teaching. I taught in the private school system, a junior high for 2 years. And then they formed a new high school in South Grand Rapids, South Christian High School, and I taught there for 9 years. And then I left for politics.
Well, didn't you also teach at Calvin a little bit, too?
I did. Michigan had the Constitutional Convention, you will recall.
Yep.
And one of the staffers to that convention was Walter DeVries.
Oh, right.
Maybe you remember Walter DeVries.
Sure,
he was
absolutely.
active in it. And he was a prof at Calvin, teaching political parties, public opinion, and pressure groups.
He'd been one of your professors?
No, he was...
he came afterwards? Okay.
And he taught state and local government. He left, and I filled in temporarily for 2 years when he was gone.
While he was a delegate to the convention, and that's where he hooked up with George Romney at the Constitutional Convention and the West Michigan Mafia.
That's right.
And they all went on to bigger and better things, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So, okay, you're township supervisor in Paris Township. You're teaching, and the Constitutional Convention is going on. And then in 1962, there's an election for the state senate. Now, had you ever run beyond township office before? Had you thought about it? I mean, what was going through your mind at that time?
When I was teaching, at the end of my teaching career, the Constitutional Convention was called, and they were going to elect delegates. And I believe they elected a delegate from each House district and one from each Senate district.
Yeah.
So I filed petitions for a House district delegate to the Constitutional Convention.
Okay.
That was my first statewide venture. Ella Cousy was state committee woman, or national committee woman. And John Martin was the committee man.
Sure.
Well, they both came and visited me, and Ella Cousy said, I never sought political office, but I really would like to be a delegate to the convention. And you are a candidate for it also, and I don't know how the election is going to come out.
In the same district.
In the same district.
Yeah.
But I really would appreciate it if you'd step aside. Well, John Martin was just a great guy, and he said also, you know, Ella really deserves this, and if she steps aside, if you have other ambitions later, I'll put together a group that will help you win an office, either state rep or state senate, if you'd like to do it. I felt that was a reasonable request. And I had known Ella a little bit because she was very active, you know, as a volunteer.
Right, sure.
She just gave an awful lot of money and a lot of time.
Right.
So I felt obligated a little bit, and